Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today we have a great guest coming back, Rob McKenzie. This is probably his fourth or fifth or maybe even more time on. And he's going to help me continue the series that I started with Paul Hoppy about a month ago. What made you Rebel Scum? So Rob, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. How are you doing, Matthew?
I'm good. I'm good. I was in Palm Springs over the weekend doing some judge stuff. Palm Springs is proof that literal hell on earth does exist. It is both,
Isn't it pretty?
it is horrifically hot. And then just to help you understand that you are now in hell, the airport is open air.
Oh,
Yeah, there's no air conditioning. There's
yeah.
gates that have a little bit of thing, and there's no air conditioning there. And then you go outside, and it's just hell, and it's just the huge ball of fire in the sky telling you,
Okay.
you came to a desert. Fuck you. So
Okay.
I,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
may have strong opinions on it. Other people really like it. It was beautiful to look at from the few places on Earth that were air conditioned, but it
Yeah.
was a little hot. It was a little hot.
And we're in the future. You could use solar panels to air condition now. So,
You know,
like,
it could have been a thing. It could have been a thing. But
yep.
anyway, putting all that aside, we're continuing a fun series that we had. I'm sorry. Actually, Rob, tell me more about how you were doing though.
Oh, I've been doing pretty well. Since last time I was on the show, I moved positions within my job. I'm uh managing judges in the Magic Judge program. I'm, doing stuff.
Yeah.
It's been fun. So,
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, you are someone who I've been having the kind of ethical and moral and fandom conversations that this podcast is about for years and years. And I always love hearing your perspectives. And I know that you're someone who, you and I don't always line up on every social and moral and political issue, but I think we're both the kind of people that the right would not like very much. We're somewhere on the woke scale, however you want to defend it. And the thing I've been doing with this series, it's titled "What Made You Rebel Scum," and the idea is kind of looking back at what is the media. However, Rebel Scum, whatever that means to you. As I said, we're gonna have a wide range of areas where we disagree, but whatever it is, what is the media that helped shape who you are and what your values are, and how you sort of see the world politically, morally, ethically, socially, all of that. And I'm sure we're going to come up with a couple of different things, but I wanted to kind of start it by throwing out to you. Like when I say to you, what helped shape Rob into the person who believes the things that he believes, what comes to mind?
so there's a couple of big ones. My favorite author is Isaac Asimov,
Mm,
and the there's a especially so he was an avowed pacifist for his whole life. He lived through World War II, but he was a chemist, and he volunteered to be in a chemistry lab instead of going out and doing fighting. He believed it was important to do things for the war, but he couldn't stomach being
right.
being violent. And he's got a couple of things that really have always kind of stuck with me. There's a phrase which is clearly kind of tongue in cheek from one of his characters in the
Hmm.
Foundation books, which is violence is the last refuge of the incompetent.
Yeah.
And Salvor Hardin, if he would have had real power, so the structure of the story is that the Terminus, the Foundation, has no political power, it has no military power. Everything that it generates is due to being smarter than everybody and using social pressure.
Right.
And Salvor Hardin juggles four major warring powers and the like becomes totally in control of the region despite Terminus not having any resources because he doesn't have the power to do violence.
Right.
Uh, but on the flip side, the violence in Asimov's books really doesn't help the people doing violence for the most part. The violence is people do it, but it's always the villains who do it, basically.
Right.
It's always wrong to make the violent choice. Through his early works, that's really the case. It becomes more complicated as he gets older and gets more the Foundation is clearly pretty written when he's reasonably young.
Right.
But he also in his robot stories, the three laws of robotics, a robot may not harm a human or through an action allow a human to come to harm. Susan Calvin says that robots are better. They can't hurt you.
Right.
Then they have to obey, and then they have to then they have to protect their own existence third. And but that number one is don't hurt people. That's like the golden
Right.
rule of everything, is don't do a thing that hurts somebody. Um, and the robot stories are very complicated in that there's a lot of like, what happens if you have to make a choice that's going to hurt somebody?
Right.
Like there's these trade-offs, but thinking about it, like what is the least harmful? What is the thing that is that if you have the choice between breaking somebody's leg or getting a cut on somebody's finger, which is the least harmful thing, is very
Right.
obvious. But then life is a lot more complicated than that. But
Right.
thinking at the frame of like what hurts people the least is a good frame, I think, a lot of the time. And I don't think enough people make those choices.
Yeah, it really is. And I've heard that law of robotics applied in many situations. And I think some of them are Asimovs themselves, and other things are people, taking it and kind of pushing further back. And one of my favorites is like a little meme that it says, the first law we taught the robots was do not allow humanity to be harmed through your inaction. We didn't teach
Yeah.
them that capitalism was the exception.
Yeah.
And the implication being that the robots were just like, well, capitalism harms people, imperialism harms people, so we're not allowed to enact. We haven't been programmed to say we just accept that because we think that minimizes harm, because that's often a lie. So instead, the robots just go, well, no more capitalism, no more imperialism.
Right. I've mentioned it before, there's a story, the evitable conflict, not inevitable,
Right.
but evitable conflict, where where AIs that follow the laws of robotics are shaking loose these problematic elements of society. Somebody who's a white supremacist, who's a factory owner, suddenly his widgets aren't necessary anymore, and the factory dries up and he doesn't have resources and power anymore because his factory collapsed, because they changed the economics of the situation by pushing on something. And they're trying to do the least harm. They're like, he will do more harm if we hurt him a little bit now, he'll harm fewer people later, which is, it's both good and creepy.
Yeah.
Like I don't, in the real world, I don't actually trust humans for the most part to consistently apply that level of judgment.
Right.
And so everything should have checks and balances.
Well,
but that's the other, yeah. Oh,
well, I was gonna say, and that's one of my main questions is, when you start with the idea of let's figure out how to do the most good for the most people and the least harm to the least people, there's a lot of value in that kind of a thinking. It can also, and I think this is where a robotic mind can become problematic unless it's further programmed, it can become utilitarianism, where you're trying to do the most good for the most people, but if you can save 1,000 by murdering 30, then it is perfectly okay to murder 30. And that sort of system has been, and I'm people who believe in utilitarianism are now yelling at me, and I'm obviously taking it to an extreme, but that is often a justification used for, some of the worst people in history who have claimed that they're going to make everything better by just killing this one group of people or by enforcing this kind of a thing or something like that. And so in Asimov's work, how is that balanced? How do you get away from the, because maybe actually the best thing to do is, to kill all the rich people, to kill all the billionaires. That's certainly a somewhat humorous, but I think to some people becoming more and more of a real idea. What would Asimov's response be to that?
That's the plot of The Naked Sun, and The Robots of Dawn. Is so you said we taught them not to harm humanity. Humanity and humans are different.
Okay, say more.
And there's the robots are taught not to harm humans, but not humanity.
Right.
But Daniel Olivaw sits and figures out, and he's like, I don't think that's good enough. I think that the humanity needs to come before the humans, which is very utilitarian. And he then makes a choice to severely damage to irradiate Earth, to drive everybody off of Earth, because he believes that people need to leave the nest, basically, which is very much a baby birds are happier in the nest. They're safe in the nest, but they gotta fly. But some baby birds don't make it when you push them out of the nest.
Right.
And so some of them don't fly and get caught when they hit the ground, and some of them fly and get caught in the air by other birds, and it's sometimes bad things happen.
Right.
And he's like, I can't I can't not like I can't prevent all harm. I can't stop everyone from being harmed everywhere. So
Right.
I have to make the choice that I think is best. And so he makes the choice to irradiate the earth, which does kill a lot of people and harms a lot of people. And in fact, he like ends up being able to kill a villain, basically. Well, he
Right.
doesn't, Giscard does, but he's like, I can make the choice about sacrificing this person for the greater good. But it's a fairly he believes it's an obvious greater good. I think the people that die on Earth would probably consider it to be, you could have made a better choice.
Right.
And Asimov is obviously conflicted, and I'm obviously conflicted. I don't know, like,
Yeah.
you have to try to not do active evil, but there's a lot of gray in, like, I mean, my day job, I work with companies that produce military things.
Right.
I support them because they're one of our many manufacturing customers. We have all sorts of manufacturing customers, but I can't refuse to support a company that makes missiles or drones or you know
Mm-hmm.
or guns or whatever. I can't say no. Uh, it's just a part of the job.
Right.
But I
Well, and I'm going to push back there a bit
yeah,
to be clear. I'm not questioning your choices.
right.
I make
No, that's
similar
the
ones,
point.
but
Yeah.
I do just want to make sure we're clear on our language. You could choose to, but it would mean
Yes, I
putting
would
you
quit
and
the
your
job.
family in
Right.
economic, danger
Right.
and things like that.
Well, it's not even economic danger. I don't think that I think that it's more complicated than just this company. Companies aren't exclusively one thing or another, just like people's aren't
Right.
exclusively one thing or another. Situations aren't exclusively like super like as much as we're in a world where there's a lot of black and white decisions right now.
Mm-hmm.
As much as there's a group of people in power that are trying to make it very clear that cruelty is the point. We're gonna keep sending thugs into Minneapolis until your morale is down. We don't
Yeah.
want your morale improved. We just want to send thugs to make you obey. There's a lot of these black and white situations. Almost all of things are gray to some degree.
Yeah.
Of like the like the it, very few things are single purpose. Very few companies do just one thing. Um, do you want the ability to produce both a both the air purifier that's in my house and also a you know robotic missile system? Well, you should go to Honeywell because they they manufacture both.
Yeah.
And so like and but that kind of complexity is also like that you can't just say that this is always the right choice or always the wrong choice. Is I think like the
Right.
heart what makes pushing back against bad decisions and evil decisions important. You have to
Sure.
figure out where your gray line is, what the like and how you improve that gray line.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think it's very true, and I think my point there wasn't to go for some kind of moral purity.
yeah,
I think the other
no,
side of
no,
it is like, let's say you decide to quit your job, someone likely is just going to take that job. Like,
yep.
is that you could make that sacrifice? Is that a sacrifice that's going to do good, as opposed to something
And,
else?
and sometimes it does. Sometimes you're just like, you know, this job doesn't have to exist. This thing doesn't have to exist. You don't
Yeah.
have to make this thing. Uh, like and you can make a different choice. That's the other thing that I've taken away from science fiction is you can always make choices to improve things and do things better, and you can
Right.
take agency in a lot of these decisions, even if you're somebody in a relatively small position.
Yeah.
Um, like I don't expect like you can push to like I go and push back against to use another world example. I push back against management at my job or push back against things in the state. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I I've started to go to state conventions and stuff for the Democratic Party, and
Right.
I've been messaging my soon-to-be state senator who's running uncontested in the Democratic primary, and then is very likely to just free roll the thing
Right.
because I'm like I want more worker protections.
Right.
I want you to I want you to do things that improve the lives of people. I want you to, change like, I would love it if the laws changed so that your time off had to be paid off or paid
Right.
out at the end of every job. I think that sucks. I think that's a bad thing for workers, that the time off, which is a piece of your compensation, can just get thrown away by the company.
Right.
And stuff like that, you can make these pushes and changes. You have the agency to do so.
Yeah. Well, I think it's such an important thing is trying to figure out where can I use my agency? Where can I do the most good?
Mhm.
Where am I helping a system that I don't like, but my
Yeah.
stepping away from that system isn't actually going to change anything? Can I do something else? Though I want to go to a different part though, which is that something I haven't read much Asimov, but I read some, and I've certainly read a lot of the stuff about it. And part of what I really like about that idea of, we taught them to not allow humans to be harmed by their inaction, and thus they, made us stop all the things we do all the time to harm humans
Mhm.
without thinking about them. To me, that's the connection of I really like science fiction that pushes us to think, what are the times when we limit our own agency because there are choices we are not allowing ourselves to consider. And sometimes they may well be stupid choices, and it's like, yeah, it's good we don't choose them, but just the language that we use. And I want to give another example that I see a lot as a polyamorous person, but I think it can apply in a lot of other situations in life. But I'll just use this in romantic terms. Sometimes I'll talk to someone, and they'll say like, "I wish I was polyamorous like you because I'm with this person, and like it's an okay relationship, but I'm in it. I want to make it work, but there's this other person, my work crush or whatever, and I just have such a crush on them, and I wish I could be with them, but I can't." Or, like I was traveling for work and I met this gorgeous person, and they made it clear that I could go to their hotel room, and I wish I could, but I couldn't. I can't. And sometimes what I would do, I mean, I'm not going to just like yell at strangers, but like if these are friends who are coming to me for advice, sometimes I'll say is like, it might be helpful to reframe this. You could, you could have absolutely
Yeah.
cheated on your partner. You made a choice that you are so dedicated to this relationship that is basically something outside of the realm of possible choices that you allow yourself. And
Yep.
that's a completely reasonable choice, but own that. And or on the
Yes.
flip side, ask yourself, is it correct that you are keeping that, that you are saying, I cannot quit my job much as I hate it. I cannot leave this relationship. I cannot stop talking to my parent or my sibling who abuses me or whatever it is. The ability to say, what if we don't make that assumption? And to me, I think that's something really powerful about imagining the robotic mind is if you give it a conclusion that humans have come to, but not the steps that get to it, it's often not going to make the assumptions that you make. And where does that
Right.
lead
It
to?
isn't. Yeah, it isn't going to follow the same thought process, and
Yeah.
you can just even see this as people, like like with all stories, it's an exploration of people, right?
Right.
And so somebody else is going to make totally different decisions than you. They might not come from the same assumptions, and the robots make it really clear that they have a strong ethical boundary, right?
Right.
But other people's are more porous, and so then you get to see what the comparison of what different types of ethical porousnesses are,
Right.
and so the making the decision to not do a thing because it's like so picking on the I'm not going to cheat on my partner thing is you have made a strong ethical commitment to a particular course of action.
Right.
And what does that mean? What does that imply about the system that you're in? What are you gaining from that? What are you losing from that? And
Mm.
what does the commitment mean? Like
Right.
like making an oath to do a particular thing at a particular time isn't just when it's easy. If robots never had to, step in front of a speeding car to save a child, it wouldn't be a big deal. If there's no challenge, like if there's no,
Right.
if there's no challenge to it, then the ethical like line doesn't mean a lot. It's when you push on it and when you challenge it, and it's like this is an abstraction of like don't harm humans, but you can think about it as don't cheat on your partner. Are there circumstances where a robot maybe should harm a human? Are there circumstances where you maybe should cheat on your partner?
Yeah.
Maybe I don't necessarily agree that that's true,
Right.
but that's what the decisions and thoughts are about.
Right. Well, especially because I think that The statement, do not harm a human or allow a human not to be harmed or allow a human to be harmed.
Yeah.
To me, first you have to talk about what does harm mean,
Yep.
but also you have to talk about what does it mean if I'm not supposed to allow a human to be harmed, but the only way to avoid 5 humans being harmed is to harm 1 human. And
Yeah.
like there's an obvious sort of like, if the only way you can stop a person from pressing the button that sets off the nuke is to kill them, like, so therefore is harming that human to prevent the harming of 5 million justified? But I'll even give kind of a much more sort of like within the bounds of understandable morality. One of the favorite courses I took in ethics was in grad school, and the professor started by talking about like, can there be an act that is just purely always a moral good or a moral bad? And started, one of the things that she suggested was like taking a knife to cut another human being. And because we were kind of dumb and we were trying to figure this out, we were like, yeah, that's a clear moral bad. And she says, what?
Surgery.
Yeah, what if a surgeon is cutting you open to take out your appendix? And is that harming them to avoid harm? Yes. The act of cutting them open in our day and age is about 99.5% safe, but like infections can still happen, things can happen. And like a scenario that I'm thinking of in my head is, because I've seen this on so many different ER type shows, a person is in a building that's falling down, whatever, and something incredibly heavy has fallen on their leg. And the only way to save their life is to amputate their leg. Where do you think an Asimov robot, like an Asimov robot, going to be able to come to the conclusion of cutting off this leg is objectively harming this person, but is in, if I fail to do that, the person will die? Is that a kind of compromise that a Asimovian robot can make?
So that's where so there's stories like this, because the other thing is that there's a progression of the stories of like, there's a company that makes the robots and they become better and more sophisticated over time. And so there's a lot of like lessons learned, and then the robots become more and more sophisticated, complicated as they go on.
Right.
And so like early stories, it definitely would have let the human die, but then also locked up and like its mind would have broken. And then in later stories, it would have made the choice to cut the leg, and then probably still would have died. Like it still would have locked up as a result. In very later ones, it much later ones, it would have just been like, yep, this is a sensible decision, do it.
Right.
And would have just done it. And so it's also a like, where do they fall on a social comprehension spectrum?
Yeah.
Like like a child morality is very different than adult morality in a lot of circumstances.
Right.
Never take cookies from the cookie jar is a very good maxim for a child, but it's not as useful as an adult.
Right. Yeah, your diabetic friend is going and needs sugar ASAP.
Yep.
Can you? Or the Les Miserables is definitely one of the stories that most shaped me, and that whole idea of like, how do you understand stealing when someone is starving? There's because I'm now in a lot of like parental discussion groups, there's a meme that will go around a lot of times, which is, if you see someone stealing diapers, no, you didn't. And I always love that. And I always often have the caveat of like, if I see them stealing from a mom and pop grocery store, I might just go and, without saying why, give an extra $30 to the store to basically cover the cost of what someone stole. If they steal from Walmart, I definitely don't care. But like someone who needs to steal diapers, like something is so broken that they need that I'm not going to stop it.
I'm also going to make the contention that anything that you would probably class as a non-taxable item, like food, so in Minnesota we don't tax food, for instance.
Right.
I think that stealing it is socially wrong, but not morally wrong, because socially what ends up happening is if you steal the same thing over and over, either people stop stocking it, and so you end up with other people losing out on it, or they do the crazy thing where they're like, everything is behind glass at a place, and you have to ask somebody. Like, I went to the hardware store at one point, there had been so much shoplifting that they had chained the aisles and didn't allow you to go into the aisles alone. And they were like, nope, I have to go down to the aisle with you in order to help you pick out the thing. And they're like, we can't stop this otherwise.
Right.
And so I from this is a corporate like store, like you can stand to have the shrink, but then what ends up happening is other people get punished functionally one way or another.
Right.
And so, but figuring out to what degree, just like you see them stealing it, be like, hey, if you feel like you need to steal that, here's the money for it. That's
Right.
fine. I think that's good. I think that's the good that I want to see. That's the maximum
Right.
good, because then it prevents both the other harms that I see. And yeah,
Right. Or even like to me, the next step is if it because yeah, if it's one person, it's one person. If enough people are stealing diapers that it's causing these problems, and diapers are now hard, the price is going up, and the price and they are harder to access, then yes, there's the problem, all of those problems, but also there's the question of what are we doing in our society that this many people can't access such a fundamental need of, babies, which
yeah,
there's I think you'd be hard pressed to find a moral system that doesn't have a like protect the young,
yeah,
to some extent or another.
yeah,
And wait, what's the direction is going to go there? Um, well, and for me, I think that also sets up some interesting questions of how do you judge like the action of an individual versus the actions writ large, you know?
yeah.
And talk a little bit more about how in I'm sorry, this whole thing didn't go
Yep.
in the direction. Um I'll do it this way. So there's a couple other of things that I know have been influential to you that I want to get on. Is there any last things you want to say about Asimov and the robot laws of robotics and Foundation?
Yeah. Just some of his stuff. Asimov is not a flowery writer, but he is a writer who tries to make you realize that other people have different perspectives and makes you think.
Yeah.
Like that's there's very few scenery chewing villains in Asimov. There's a
Yeah.
lot of like, I've got a totally different motive and I'm pushing to do a different thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I've been working my way through the Foundation TV show, which I'm sure you may have strong opinions on, either positively
I
or
do
negatively. But
both.
yeah, so I think we'll definitely do an episode on that. I'm going to guess that another person in your sort of ethical constellation, and I don't know if it's because this sort of helped shape your thoughts, or more you enjoyed it because you confirmed your thoughts. Known primarily for his humor, but I think one of the foremost ethical writers in science fiction fantasy today, although not today because he's passed on, Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, he's one of the ones on my bullet pointed list, which is, and my notes on him say righteous anger.
Yeah, say more
Um,
about that.
so Pratchett has a lot of characters that are very unhappy that the world isn't the way they want it to be, that it isn't
Yeah.
morally aligned to their goals or dreams, and some of them have very very simple ethical systems.
I should say, by the
Uh,
way, he's primarily known for
yes,
being the writer of Discworld, that entire
yes,
like long series of books. He co-authored a number of books with Neil Gaiman, including Good Omens. Although all evidence is to the fact that Terry had no idea about some of the stuff that has gotten Neil Gaiman's in trouble.
yep,
Um, and he did a number of other, there's a number of probably science fiction or fantasy type things that you love that he probably had a
yeah,
hand in some way. But the Discworld collection of books, I think, is probably
yeah.
and the
He
place
is
where he really quite openly explores a lot of these ethical questions.
right. He openly explores a lot of them. He like the cleanest moral statement that he makes in any of them is when Granny Weatherwax says that evil comes from treating people as things.
Yeah.
And somebody's like, it's more complicated than that. She's like, it's really not.
Yeah.
It's really not. Treat people as people and not as things.
Right.
Like it, but there are characters that are angry, that are frustrated the world isn't the way that it should be. There's characters that are changing. There's characters that try and fail. There's characters that um the big thing that Terry Pratchett has going for him is everybody's just trying to live. As
Right.
weird as everybody is, as dwarves are strange and werewolves exist, but they're just trying to live and get by. And everybody just wants to live life, be happy, have a family, have a circle of friends that they defend,
Mhm.
and then uh he does have scenery chewing villains. There's plenty of scenery chewing villains in Pratchett. But the other, so there's one that nobody ever really talks about, which is a book called Strata by Terry Pratchett.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a science fiction book that is a pastiche of Ringworld by Larry Niven.
Right.
And it is like laser focused on me, because Ringworld is great. But the thing is that Strata is a story about how people think that everybody thinks like them.
Yeah.
There's all these stories about aliens that are just kind of humans in rubber suits and masks with like very humanish motives. Like Star Trek, for all the things that it does right, it's uh the things in the aliens in Star Trek are mostly like exaggerations of a human characteristic
Right.
in order to be able to tell a story. And in Strata, the thing that keeps getting made a point of over and over and over is the aliens don't think like humans. You pretend that they do because it helps you get by as a human, but uh
Yeah.
it's not true. Like like you've made these aliens into fake humans, and it's not the
Yeah.
case. But it's the same with people. You think that people are it's the it's a common fallacy for people to think that everybody thinks and behaves like them.
Right.
You know, if everybody just didn't drink very much and wasn't very interested in smoking pot, it'd be a great, much better world. I don't think it's actually true. I've come to terms with the fact that people are going to have different things that they like to do than me,
Yeah.
and but that's the way that it is. That you have to come to terms with the fact that people are going to be different than you.
And I think that's
And
such a fascinating counterpoint to Asimov because, and again, I don't know how much this is Asimov or the people who then build off of it, but one of the places where I often get very kind of squiggy about sort of the idea of robotic, conversations about ethics is the idea that if you have the kind of perfect robotic, unbiased mind, it will come to the objectively proper ethical or moral conclusion. And
yeah,
that's an idea that I always think is deeply flawed because,
yep,
as we're saying, like just in terms of when I was in graduate school, I was at a school in California, and there were a lot of students from Asia who were there. And we were having this conversation. I was in grad school for becoming a pastor. We were talking about the Bible a lot, and just looking at how we talk a lot of how America is an incredibly individualistic society with a lot of good to that and also some problems. And friends of mine who are from Japan, we were talking pretty openly about how the society that they came from is a much more communitarian focused society, in some ways a lot better than the US, and in some ways also problematic. And it would be interesting when we would realize we're both reading the same text, but from very different lenses of, are we looking at this in terms of the harm the community is doing to the individual, or the responsibility the community has to the individual, or the responsibility the individual has to the community? And to me, more than anything, what came out of that is like no one way is objectively better than the other. I don't mean that. I mean, some ethical system,
well,
Nazis thought they were doing the objectively right thing. Clearly, that was not the case. But yeah, the idea that like there's value to be had in learning how someone else thinks and learning the values that they start from, even if you're not going to decide that they're your values.
right. And the instrumental goals they're trying to achieve with those values, because there's values and there's the goals that you want to achieve alongside them.
Right.
So it's the like, no ethical system is objectively better, but it might be objectively more effective at achieving a particular task.
Right.
And that's a really sterile way to say it, but like when you say communitarian, like an ethical system that is a lot more community property focused, and it like has a lot fewer individually owned pieces of property, is a lot better in a resource scarce system where
Right.
if if we're on a if we're on the shared floor of of a a big building, like and there's a common central bathroom or central cooking area that we all use, that is our social system can't deal with that. And also, like, who owns that
Right.
is the question that you ask a lot of the time, is like, does the building own this central property? Like, if you're in a townhome, who owns the yards that get mowed?
Right.
And we have these questions. Ownership isn't necessarily like relevant in a lot of
Right.
situations where you're working community in a community system.
Yeah.
And so it's very very much, what are you trying to accomplish? Which is, if you're trying to make sure that everybody gets their fair share, then you might not have ownership. If you're trying to make sure that everybody produces the maximum amount they can produce, then you need to have some kind of system that encourages them to produce more.
Right. And I think that's actually the perfect example, because that's the kind of thing where I think a lot of times conflict occurs because we have situations where there is a communal resource of some kind that people are still approaching from an individual basis, and anyone who's worked in an office that has a shared kitchen, if you have people who have a shared feeling of all of us should be contributing to the upkeep of this kitchen for the general good of all, it's often going to work out well. If you have people who say, this is my corner of the counter, and this is my shelf in the fridge, and this is my shelf in the closet, in the cabinet, and to hell with everything else, well, each person's going to have a lot more freedom. And maybe they can put things that are going to cause other things to not smell so good, but it's their part of their fridge, and they get to do what they want. And clearly I have a bias in that regard, but I also think that I guess actually here's the perfect example I can use is that, so to me, if you treat the shared kitchen as I have 1/7 of it, so I can do whatever the hell I want and to hell with everyone else, that's not so good.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are 7 homes in a HOA and you want to have some individuality in how you paint your house, but the HOA is saying, no, we all have to paint our houses the same thing. That feels to me like it's the community infringing on the individual rights quite a bit. And how do you find that line? That's a pretty hard thing, and
because that's the question is and sometimes those rules are off being Chesterton's fences. Because the HOA might have a rule that you're not allowed to park on the street overnight. Which sounds like a stupid rule, but it might be because they've had a lot of issues with people parking vehicles out there for a long period of time that they're working on, and it gets in the way of traffic because they had to have there was a fire,
right?
And so there might be this Chesterton's fence of we don't want to block the road because the road is actually too narrow.
Fence?
Oh, Chesterton's fence is when you have a rule, and Chesterton it says you come upon a fence in across a hill or out in the woods, and you're like, I don't know why this fence is here, and so you remove it because you don't know why it's there. Instead, you should be asking, what is the cause of this fence? There's a reason that this fence was put up here. I should figure out what the reason is before I remove the thing,
right?
Before I change the rule. And so if you find out that the rule is you can't park on the street overnight because it's actually too narrow and they can't get emergency vehicles down it, if you do that, that might be a good rule.
Right.
If painting your house for the HOA, they might be like, here's the deal, you can't paint your house in a particular way because we actually are associated with this memory community next door of elder care people, and they need to have a consistent everything needs to look consistent. And so there might be a reason for it. But sometimes it's a stupid reason. Sometimes it's just nobody likes the color blue, so you can't paint things blue.
Right.
And so it's sometimes the reasons are bad, but they having finding out the reason for a rule. But even so, challenge those reasons. That's the other thing that I've learned from science fiction is a lot of times the societal reasons that we have for things are there for no reason whatsoever. They're especially the lines against people being in a particular place. This is the classic one for United States history, but it's Discworld, it pushes on this a lot, which is if you put up a sign that says no blacks allowed in the United States, people understand really quick what's going on.
Right.
But we've been doing that kind of stuff lately. But Discworld has a lot of this of is racism against vampires racism?
Right. Yeah, because it's the question of and I think X-Men is another interesting way of dealing with this, is that one of the fundamental reasons why I think people should be in art against racism is that there actually is no scientific basis for it. There is no, scientific thing you can point to that says this race is good and this race is bad, or even that races are clear and easy boxes that you can drop people into. And so the idea of saying
they're a bundle of characteristics, but they're that isn't the same as being the entirety of a person.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas if I were to say, therefore that because people are different, there should be a different legal system that deals with them, is going to really raise your hackles. If I say this group of people are superpowered and thus can destroy any kind of existing legal system, and therefore we need a different legal system to deal with them, as in the X-Men, well, that it plays with it. And I like systems that, and again, I mean, ACAB, like I don't want any of these kind of systems, but I like when science fiction does that. It sort of says like, okay, well, we know discrimination is bad. What if it is vampires though, where there is like a threat you can point to? But also still, is there? Like, how much is it still assumptions being made about the way they're going to feed or the way they're going to do harm and stuff like that? And I think you're right that to me, so many of these stories that we love get at is just, how do we ask more questions about things that might have made sense to us once, but now we just take for granted? And two of my favorite examples of this are, one is, ancient history, and one is just directly in the work you and I do that we met through. In the Bible, so many of the rules about how you can act and what you can do come from one of two specific reasons. Either A, because telling people that from the scientific knowledge we have, shellfish and mixing cheese and meat and eating pork is dangerous, that's not a good way to get people to stop doing it. But if you say God doesn't want you to do it, guess what? People are often going to stop doing it. Also, if your people are all going to live in another land because you've been taken into exile, and all of a sudden you say, hey, all those other people do that, we want to stay separate from them, so don't do that. Okay, that makes sense in that one specific context. But here we are 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years later, still trying to apply these rules in various ways without really thinking about, like, does it make sense or does it not? The other much more common example I'll use is you and I are both part of judge programs. You were talking earlier about judging magic. That's certainly where I started. I mostly now judge Star Wars. And one thing I'm really liking about Star Wars is seeing, the magic judge program has been around for 30 years. And there's a lot of things that it has figured out very, very well. There's also some things that it does because they were created at a time when the technology that was available to your judge out on the floor was nothing like what we have today. And we've watched the judge program like kind of slowly kicking and screaming. How many events have you been to that still have a paper team, even though we're not passing out match slips and there's no paper anymore? It's all electronic, but they still call it a paper team for one reason or another. And that's changing. In Star Wars, we just never had a paper team because I'm not saying it's better, but I'm saying it's just an interesting example of what are the things that people have been doing for 20 years, 30 years, 300, 3,000 years. And it's hard to get people to think, do we still need this? Maybe that fence was needed 1,000 years ago. Is it still needed today?
Yeah. And so reevaluating your priors on a lot of these things, the figuring out whether or not having a team called paper, but also like what tasks, like what stuff you do regularly, does that need to exist?
Right.
So doing it the other way of like, this fence has always been here. Have we asked why it's here?
Yeah.
Is the other half of it.
Right.
And so they like Pratchett challenges that as everybody's always hated vampires.
Yeah.
Right. Well, eventually you have to come to terms with the fact that vampires are people and everybody's just people. And everybody just wants to do, like, once you start introducing people in an economic system where there's a lot of exchange and people want to do more with the resources that they have in front of them, eventually you run into the fact that vampires are just people and they want to do the same thing.
Right.
And you might say, well, they're bloodsuckers that are going to dominate everybody. And the answer is, okay, so you have the choice of drive them all out to keep them from doing stuff, eradicate them, or figure out a way to learn to live with them.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to learn to live with them is the only one that works in the long term. That's the way that it always is in the world out there right now.
Well, especially, and I think one thing he often talks about is how much these things can become self-perpetuating problems where, guess what? If you don't allow vampires to exist in society and you don't allow them safe ways to feed themselves with consenting people, guess what? They're going to have to resort to something else. And, one of the great arguments that I heard that really kind of shaped so much of how I see things was this person who came and talked to us about, racism and statistics in high school. And he kind of went through like a lot of the common things that racists will use and would say, okay, so look at test scores academically. And granted, this was in the 80s and early 90s, so I think today what I'm saying I was taught, I think is much more taken for granted, but still not across the board. They'd say, okay, well, different racial groups have different overall averages of test scores, and like whites or Asians tend to score higher and other groups tend to score lower. Again, 40 years ago. And then
Yeah.
it would say, okay, so we could look at that in a vacuum and say, therefore, black people don't need good schooling because they're not smart enough or some idiotic thing like that. Or we could look at the fact that the people we're testing have been in substandard schools for generations. The tests that we have designed specifically test for kinds of knowledge that you're much more likely to get if your parents had a level of education and stuff like that. And like, how do we look at those things and say, oh yeah, actually, the ways that we treat people we don't like create the situations that we then use to justify. Javert can look at Valjean and say, look, you're just a petty criminal. You and your kind are just criminals because you've starved them enough that the only way they can get bread to eat is to steal. And that part is not racially applicable, I'm saying, but that's often still, again, the racist kind of argument, is though the point at crime in different communities and stuff like that. And often those statistics are just completely made up, to be clear, but you understand the point I'm making.
Right. There's race realists out there that are just like, they make the case that there are, that on average they'll use height as a proxy for this. They'll say that on average, Japanese people are shorter than people from Kenya, for instance. And they'll pick these that is true, but it's also only loosely heritable. You can actually like change that very quickly.
Right.
And a lot of the results of this is just like, there are also outliers within the system, and there's also like a lot of complex like other social dynamics that cause a lot of these situations. The brain is a lot more complicated than the body, in terms of like these kinds of big inheritable things.
Yeah.
And so it's and also like when you boil a whole group of people down to nobody from this group is going to be good enough, that's treating them a lot like they're not fully people.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan.
Like, I've always thought one of the things I always loved about Pratchett's world, the books that I know the best are the Night Watch books, but I've read some of the others. But one thing they introduce is the kind of characters called gargoyles, who are, forgive the pun, in our own world, dumb as a box of rocks. And what they learned through some of the Night Watch books is that the thing is that gargoyles they're creatures of rock that come from high up on mountains, and their brains.
Are you thinking of trolls?
Trolls. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Gargoyles exist as well. To be clear, they're just
they do.
Gargoyles are a subspecies of troll.
Yes. Sorry. Let me. Yeah.
Sorry.
No. I'm gonna keep all that in. Yeah, you're totally right. So, but trolls in the world that most of the characters exist in seem very, very dumb. And very kind of like, you have to tell them things a million times. That they're constantly knocking themselves unconscious by saluting and hitting themselves in the head, and it's played for comedy. But one of the things that they find out is at one point one of them gets locked into a freezer unit, and all of a sudden becomes utterly brilliant, because the thing is that their brains are designed to function at extremely cold temperatures, like you would often find high up atop mountains. And when they come to our circumstances, their brains don't work in the same way. And to me, it's another one of those things of like, yes, they don't have intelligence in a way we see, because when they are in our environment, their brains are not going to work very well. When we are in their environment, well, our hearts are probably going to stop working before our brains, so we don't seem stupid. We just seem dead. But it's the same thing of like, we don't function well in their environment, but we don't judge ourselves by how we would function at the top of Mount Everest, but we judge the trolls by how they function down in our own world.
Right, exactly. And there's a lot of this, like judging a fish for its tree climbing ability.
Right.
And it's just not. That's People are more complicated than that, and that's Pratchett's take. Is like, meet people where they are. They're more complicated. They want the same thing as you.
Yeah. surprise to no one who has heard me and Rob talk about this before, but we've already gone almost to an hour and we've covered only probably some of what I wanted to get to. But just to kind of keep us not going too long, I'm just going to throw one more out there. I know that you're a big fan of Star Trek and at least a significant part of, if not the more recent, Star Wars. Pick one of those and tell me how that has also kind of shaped who you are and your values and the like.
So Trek is obviously the default one, and I was of the right age to be watching Next Generation and then Deep Space Nine on television as it was coming out, and there's a lot, and like there's obviously, it's all over the place with the show. That you'll have back-to-back episodes of the Magnificent Ferengi into Far Beyond the Stars, which
Right.
is that's the biggest tonal shift between two consecutive episodes of a show, right?
Yeah.
But the they push the bounds of what is okay. Like people come back and they'll look at Trek nowadays and they'll be like, well, why didn't they push the bounds of non-binary people back at the time? And I'm like, they did. You have to realize that Next Generation started in 1989.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about non-binary stuff, you're talking about 30-year gulf
Right.
of societal changes. And there, of course, they had an episode where they had somebody who's like, I don't feel like that we're trying to change their gender.
Right.
They had episodes where they dealt with this, but they also are a product of their time. And so if you look at it from the lens of nowadays, it's going to be different. But they also push the bounds on everything.
Yeah.
They had, the first interracial kiss on television, the first same gender kiss on television. They had episodes where they asked really deep questions about whether or not, when should you kill people, let them live. They had things like let that be your last battlefield, which is, they look the same. The two characters look exactly the same. They're racist in a way that, they're racist with shrimp colors, right? And so they push the bounds on all of these things, and then said, especially in Next Gen, Picard's motto was, we can try to be better. Whatever decisions we made in the past, whatever things we did in the past, sometimes we'll be wrong and we can be better.
And I love that because I think you can also see Star Trek in a meta way through that, because there are also some ways in which Star Trek was trying to push the boundaries and got it pretty terribly wrong. They tried to do an episode early in season 1 about a planet that was kind of representative of white stereotypes of African tribes. And I think I understood what they were trying to get at. But what you wind up with is a very sexist, racist tale of a white woman who's supposed to be the most badass combat officer on the ship being enthralled that the pseudo-African tribal leader has kidnapped her. And now the women, it's just incredibly racist, incredibly problematic. But they tried. And in a similar way, people had a critique that ever since the original and now in TNG, you've put a lot of the women characters in very short skirts. And so they thought, you know what? Let's be egalitarian. And all of a sudden, all the male ensigns were in very short skirts as well. And
they had that in Next Gen. If you look, there's a standard uniform that is a short skirt uniform, and there's males wearing it in season 1. Yeah,
it lasted for about 5 episodes, and they realized this isn't working, but they tried.
But they took it off everybody. Everybody moved away from that uniform. They showed it. And then they got rid of it because it sucked as a casting and propping thing for the show, not necessarily because they didn't want to represent it.
And that idea of, we always try to do the best we can and hope that the people who come beyond us do better. This is a debate that happens in so many fandoms, but especially in Star Trek. You have a lot of the fandom who had their kind of initial ideas confirmed and affirmed by the earlier shows, and now in the later shows are doing the exact same thing and are just pushing beyond. As you said, Next Gen was started in the late 80s and went in through the early and mid 90s. It's 35 years old.
Yeah.
Of course we see some things differently now. Yeah. And so the stories are told today in ways that, are a little bit critical sometimes of the original shows. Yeah. And people are furious about it and call it woke.
Next Gen is critical of the original series.
Yeah,
right?
Incredibly so.
they and so it's a conversation with the past and saying, we understand that you tried to do these things, but we can do better.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's hard. You grew up with a certain piece of media, and you're like, you don't like to see its flaws.
Yeah.
But everything is created by people, and nothing's perfect.
There will
So
always be a part of me that as an 8-year-old, when I hear, who you gonna call? Ghostbuster. Like, the 8-year-old in me will always love that movie.
yeah,
Even though the part of me that isn't 8 years old watches Bill Murray go full on stalker of Sigourney Weaver and goes, this is not a good movie in that regard. Or
and
like,
it's the most libertarian movie of all time. The villain is an EPA inspector.
yeah,
right?
how am I like? It's such an like if you understand Reaganomics and Reagan ideas
Yeah.
of rugged individuals and screw the man, like. No, actually, I don't want 4 scientists who can't hold down a university job because they keep trying to seduce the test subjects to decide whether or not to have a ghost infestation in their laboratory in a firehouse.
Right.
I don't think that's good.
Right. He's like, do you have a permit for this? Because it's a big, dangerous thing. Right? Like, it's demonstrative. Oh, we lost Matthew. So I get to talk, and Matthew can't say anything. So, yeah. Maybe we'll get Matthew back at some point, but instead, for the meantime, okay.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah.
I think Star Trek, in the way it has evolved, and I'm not saying every new show is perfect. Like, I thought Enterprise, not my favorite, and I think there are many legitimate reasons to not like some of the newer shows. But I think people who will claim, oh, TNG was challenging ethical ideas in the right way. DS9 did it the right way, but now it's values I don't like, so it's woke or whatever. That's nonsense.
That drives me crazy because, like, if you look at it at the time, some of the episodes of TNG were really problematic for them to air on television. Same with Deep Space Nine. They said, are we allowed to air this? And the showrunners just said, we'll do it. What are they going to do?
Yeah.
Like, are they going to cancel Star Trek for showing a future that might be better or might be worse? There are definitely some decisions in Star Trek as a like, it's a decision made for the show that definitely would suck if you lived in the world.
Well, but, like, did you follow what happened with Starfleet Academy?
I have not followed that very much.
Because we
didn't people have blasted a bunch of the actors for not being like traditionally like body shaped, which drives me crazy. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a gay Klingon that people are like, no, you can't have that. And he's also kind of a pacifist Klingon, which is, I think, awesome. But like, but more to the point, like, you're right. To some extent with DS9 and Next Generation, people might not have liked it, but there's a general feeling from the network of like, whatever, it's Star Trek. We're going to do what we're going to do. Starfleet Academy definitely pushed those bounds in its own way as well. I like the show a lot. I think there are legit critiques of it. I think there's also a lot of very illegitimate critiques of it. One of the people who was very loud in his critiques of it and calling it woke garbage was Elon Musk. And Donald Trump echoed some of those. It is owned by Paramount. Paramount, who is trying to undertake this very big deal of buying Warner Brothers. And it was done, it quickly became clear that they like the uptick of assaults on the show from Musk and from Trump, and Trump making statements about how he wants to support like good patriotic American broadcasting companies. It was pretty soon after that Paramount canceled the show. And I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's not it isn't seen as a conspiracy. It is fairly widely understood that Paramount canceled the show in part because there's a lot of pressure from folks like Musk and from Trump. And maybe that, I haven't seen the viewership numbers. Like, maybe you can claim their viewership numbers were really down because Musk said, don't watch it. But certainly a lot of people were watching it and to all this. So it's to me a concerning thing that we're no longer in a media landscape where people will say, all right, well, TNG is challenging things, or, well, this kiss between Kirk and Uhura is going to make all those broadcasters in the South mad. Well, we're still going to do it. Like,
yeah,
that's not the media landscape we're in right now. And I hope that changes back.
Well, but that's it's always been the case that shows had to deal with censorship
Right.
and similar. Like when you talk about that, the interracial kiss, that was literally censored and literally caused the it literally caused the broadcasters a huge pile of headaches.
Right.
And so I think we are right in that same exact landscape of like they made the choices that they made, and then they had the showrunners got the show canceled as a result of making the choices that they made.
Yeah.
And so I think they made that ethical decision, and sometimes you do. And so that's
Yeah,
I don't
I
think
think, and
it's good that
I may have to
they
get more
can't
into
win, but yeah.
I'm not as knowledgeable about the weeds of it, but I mean, certainly like Star Trek wasn't canceled as a show because of the kiss, even though a lot of the Southern broadcasters didn't like it. But I hear what you're saying. Like, it's not. I think it's a difference of degree, not of a completely different thing. But it definitely feels like it's much worse.
A bunch of the syndicates contacted and said that they weren't going to carry the show anymore. Because
right, but the network didn't stop production on it because of that.
True.
And that's what's happened with they basically said, even before the second season airs, they've said there will not be a third season, no matter how popular the second season is. So
yeah.
On that cheery note, any last comments you want to make or throw out?
The other one that I wanted to talk about that we didn't talk about is one that we haven't talked about much, which is Piers Anthony.
I know very little of his stuff.
Yeah, he is not the most highbrow of fantasy fiction, but again, he's the theme of like people are different, but that doesn't make them wrong.
Yeah.
And so that is that's just a lot of what goes on in Piers Anthony's stuff.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these authors were a lot more libertarian than I've ended up being, but that's like I disagree with a lot of them, but that's fine. That's very reasonable, I think. So
I mean, I think a lot of the one thing that I think about a lot, and this is a whole other subject, we should probably actually do another episode about it, but I'll just kind of say it because I was thinking of this earlier starting. I feel like there's a lot of ideas that were just, again, sort of like baked into society that we took for granted that are now being challenged a lot. You talked about Asimov's pacifism. You know, to me, it's not, I think it's an interesting cultural moment that Magneto has become more of a sympathetic anti-hero, if not an actual hero, than just seen as a pure villain. And that, you know, people watched Black Panther and a lot of people were like, well, Killmonger's not entirely wrong. And that within political circles, there's a lot of talk about like, well, wait a minute, like, yes, nonviolence has a lot of value and a lot of power, but also, you know, the whole point is that they listen to us, and if they start just ignoring us, then does violence become an option and things like that. And that's a much deeper ethical conversation. But I think with both nonviolence and libertarianism, my only point is I think they held a different place in our society when a lot of those authors were writing than they do today. And that's another interesting thing to look at. All right. Well, with that, Rob, where can people find more of the stuff you do?
I record a lot with Good Luck High Five, which is a YouTube channel that does Magic the Gathering content. I'm especially on Commander Arcade a lot, recording a lot of videos of Commander gameplay with them. So if you want to see more of me online, come tune into those things. And that's basically my home for content production.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Definitely check all those things out. They're really enjoyable, especially if you play Magic. But even if you don't, I think there's a lot of fun things to pick up. I am The Ethical Panda. You can find me at theethicalpanda.com. That's where also you'll find the Star Wars Generations podcast. We've done episode by episode coverage of Maul, and we're going to have a lot more to say about it. That is a show that just utterly blew the doors off of Star Wars and has raised so many interesting questions, especially around the idea of like, can you tell a villain story without it necessarily being a redemption story and yet still make the character sympathetic or interesting? Great storytelling, a lot that we'll have to talk about. Send in your thoughts and your questions. We would love to hear them. Matthew at theethicalpanda.com or any of the contact information that's on the website. On behalf of myself and Rob, thank you all so much for listening. May the Force be with you.